Hello everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening from wherever you are. We are so excited for you all to join us today for a session on ingest and manage data in Fabric with Microsoft Data MVP. And presenting along with me today is Greg. Over to you, Greg.
Hey Nandan, my name's Greg Nash. I'm a data platform MVP. I'm based in Melbourne, Australia. I've been doing Power BI for 9.5 years, and I've got my DP-203 in data engineering. So I'm really looking forward to seeing what's involved with the DP-700 and what the swap over's like. So yeah, I can't wait.
Same here. Hello again. I'm Nandan Hegde. I'm a Microsoft Data Platform MVP and a Microsoft Fabric super user. I work as a data architect at Accenture, and I'm basically from India. You all can reach out to me via LinkedIn or Twitter or my site. And just a reminder to everyone, this is a live and an interactive session. So please say hi and post your queries and questions in the chat. And this session would also be available on demand in the Microsoft YouTube channel for those who wish to see this later as well. Now, present along with us today are two of our esteemed data platform MVPs, Greg and Anupama Natarajan, who would act as moderators for this session and answer all your queries across the chats. Now, last week and previous weeks, the Microsoft Reactor calls have been about progressing from DP-203 to DP-700. Now, this is another series focusing on becoming a Fabric data engineer. And today's session is second in that list, which highlights on how to ingest and manage data in Fabric with data fabrics and notebook, with data factory and notebooks. So, Greg, do you want to share with the audience about the Fab conference?
Yes, couldn't go any further without first talking about FabCon, which is coming up. So that's at the MGM Grand in Las Vegas. If you can make your way down to Las Vegas to get to this conference, this is going to be absolutely massive. They had the same conference last year. It's literally everybody who's anybody in Fabric and Power BI is going to be there. You're going to have all of the product team doing presentations, the Microsoft people, all of the experts. There's going to be a ton of MVPs there, and everybody is going to be presenting. There's going to be thousands and thousands of your peers, other data engineers, and other people who are trying to figure out Fabric and how to use Fabric. This is the place to go for getting to kind of meet and collaborate with the Fabric community. So there's the link there. Definitely don't miss that one.
A great way to increase your network, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. All right, moving on. We're looking at the other thing that they're providing for us as a part of this series is there's a 50% discount for the DP-700 exam. So make sure you copy that link. That's akka.ms/gc/dp700. That'll get you your 50% discount for your exam, so that you can go and get that discount. So make sure you take advantage of that one. All right, that's enough of the cool free things and awesome stuff that's happening in the Fabric world. Let's get into it. So this is episode 2 of the Get Certified series. We are looking at the DP-700, and particularly today we're looking at ingesting and managing data in Fabric with Data Factory and notebooks. So this is really a step-by-step series around mastering the DP-700. You can see today we're going to be covering a DP-700 overview. So we'll just give you a quick overview of what the DP-700 is for anybody that is new to it. And then we're going to talk a little bit about an intro to Fabric to get people up to speed. And then this series is really covering that data ingestion, data integration, pipelines and notebooks part of Fabric, right? So these are the pieces of Fabric that we're going to be using to go and get data. We're going to bring data into our Fabric environment, and we're going to be able to kind of manipulate that data. So super important part of Fabric, and something that you'll definitely be tested on in the DP-700. If we have a look at the DP-700 now, if we just move into an overview about the DP-700, essentially it's looking at the fundamental skills that engineers need to know to pass the DP-700 certification. Now, DP-700 is an advanced role-based certification. That means you really do need that practical experience to pass this exam. This is not the sort of exam that you can go in. It's not a beginner's level exam like an awareness level exam. This is the sort of thing you do need that practical experience. And so Microsoft have all sorts of amazing ways to get free access to Fabric and to practice and to do these things. And so you really do need that. And so if we move on to the next slide. So here is the actual exam itself, the DP-700. You can see it's an intermediate level exam that's aimed at data engineers. And so you really need to have that expertise in kind of data loading patterns, data architectures, and orchestration processes, specifically in Fabric. So they're essentially going to cover that ingesting and transforming data, securing and managing an analytics solution, monitoring and optimizing those analytic solutions in Fabric. In terms of languages, the three main kind of languages you want to look at are Custo, PySpark, or there's four, sorry. Oh, no, and KQL. So they're the three, sorry. So SQL, PySpark, and Custo are the three kind of main languages. And you can see how the exam is organized, right? So you've got 30% of it is around implementing and managing those solutions. So that's going to be all around how to configure Fabric and how to kind of put stuff together, orchestrate those processes. You're going to have about 30% looking at ingesting and transforming data, which is a lot of what we'll be talking about today, and then 30% on monitoring and optimizing those analytics solutions. So you do need a broad understanding of all the different pieces of the Fabric puzzle. So this certification replaces the DP-203. That was the one that I mentioned I had earlier. So yeah, I'm sad to see the DP-203 go. So that certification was more focused on the Azure Synapse analytics solutions. There's a lot of transferable skills that you can bring from Synapse and other kind of PySpark based engineering solutions that will translate directly to Fabric, right? You're still using Python, you're still using notebooks, you're still using a lot of these types of skills. It's really just how does it work in the Fabric space, and then what are the extra pieces that Fabric bring to the puzzle. Nandan, what's your kind of take on the whole change from DP-203 to DP-700?
So, as you rightfully called out, DP-203 was more oriented towards Azure data engineering aspect and on the Azure Synapse Analytics. Though it's sad to see that it's getting retired on March 31st, but would still encourage those who have experience across Azure data engineering to go and pursue that certification, because that in turn would help them in their DP-700 as well, because the Fabric is basically a SaaS version of Azure Synapse Analytic itself. So both would go hand in hand in for their career enhancement as well. So enough about the certification aspect, and let's move on to the core crux of this, that is the Microsoft Fabric. Now, what is Microsoft Fabric? So Microsoft Fabric is basically a SaaS tool, that is a software as a service tool, and an all-in-one analytic solution for enterprises that covers everything from data movement to data science, real-time analytics, and business intelligence. Now, since Microsoft Fabric is built on a SaaS foundation, it unifies all the existing components and any new components from Power BI covering the analytical sites, Azure Synapse Analytics, Azure Data Factory, and more into one single environment, custom tailored for your custom user experiences. Within Fabric, as we said, it covers everything right from Data Factory, which is basically integration combining for data movement, data engineering for data transformations across multiple sources, data warehouses wherein you in turn need to preserve or store your data, data science for machine learning and AI experimentation, and real time intelligence to have real-time streaming data and to do analytics on top of that. And of course, Power BI for our data analytical aspect. Now, the key feature of Microsoft Fabric is the one lake. So Microsoft Fabric allows you to create a unified lakehouse that consolidates all your organizational data. Now, this central repository supports diverse data types and formats, making it easier to manage and analyze your data in one place. So, one can state that your one lake is a single, unified, logical data lake for your whole organization. Hence, there is only one lake per tenant. Now, we covered about Microsoft Fabric as a tool that covers everything, and data engineering being one of the component that we would be focusing today mainly upon. Now, why is data engineering in Fabric that powerful and flexible? These are the different components that makes Microsoft Fabric a powerful and a flexible platform for managing and analyzing the organizational data. The first aspect, the one lake. As stated earlier, that the one lake is a central repository that supports diverse data types and formats in a unified and logical layer for your entire organization. So there is no data duplication and a single source of truth. Apache Spark. So one can leverage the power of Spark runtime in Microsoft Fabric to perform large scale data processing and analytics. Now, the Spark's distributed computing capabilities enable efficient handling of big data workloads that we would consequently see in the subsequent slides. And of course, various authoring experiences. One can leverage different tools like VS Code or Fabric's UI platform itself to author and make your changes across different coding layers. And finally, all these experiences are integrated in one common layer, which helps us easy to go across all data engineering aspects. Greg, your thoughts on why
Yeah, I
Fabric?
think the amazing thing about Fabric is the ability for people to bring their own kind of workload. You know, there's this concept of and I think one of the issues that I found when I was using Synapse Analytics is that I would need to go into different tools. I would have to spin up Azure Data Factory. I would have to spin up maybe a Event Hub or Stream Analytics. There's all these different technologies, and you would have a different authoring experience in each one. In Fabric, that's all brought into a single kind of platform, but you can still bring that authoring experience that you prefer. So if you prefer VS Code, you can use VS Code. If you prefer to use notebooks or you prefer to use SQL, then you can use those tools. And then for someone like me that comes from the Power BI world, I'm really comfortable in Power Query. Now, in those other tools, I couldn't bring Power Query to the table there, and that's a data transformation tool that I prefer to use. And so in this, under Fabric, I really feel like the data engineering has options for low code, no code users, all the way up to advanced data engineers that really, and data scientists that want to really hit that code hard. So I think it's a really great move from Microsoft to kind of bring it all together. Okay, let's move on to data ingestion in Fabric and talk a little bit about what are the capabilities that we can use in to bring that data in. Like I said, we've got all of these different experiences, right? And you've got some low code ones. What are the specific ingestion capabilities that Fabric brings to the table? And you can see a list here, right? So the first one being Dataflow Gen2. Okay, so Dataflow Gen2 is really that Power Query experience. That's the experience for a Power BI person like myself. I can bring that to the table, but I can do real full fidelity data engineering. I can pull data a lakehouse and put it into another one, into a different lakehouse. That kind of thing that was only available in, say, Spark or SQL in the past. So Dataflow Gen2 simplifies ingestion for users familiar with the Power Query or low-code solutions. You've got real-time ingestion for analytics at scale. So Fabric supports real-time ingestion using event hubs and Kafka, letting you analyze streaming data without needing separate services. Integration allows you to design real-time dashboards or trigger directly in Fabric. So you can do those types of real-time scenarios as well. And then you've got things like Direct Lake and shortcuts. With Direct Lake, you can ingest one lake data into one lake without having to actually copy it into Fabric. So you don't need to create that second copy, that duplication of data. And with shortcuts, you can reference that data from an external source. So it might not even be inside Azure. It could be in, say, an Amazon S3 bucket, and you can shortcut that into your Fabric environment. So it reduces that data duplication and allows the data to live in the space where it likes to live. You've got all sorts of monitoring and management capabilities. So centralizing ingestion monitoring through its portal provides a clear visibility into your pipeline statuses. And so you've really got that standardization of what's happening during the ingestion. You've obviously got Python and Spark for your advanced data engineers. They can use notebooks for those code-heavy workloads, and they're embedded into the platform, enabling custom pipelines for complex scenarios without requiring external platforms like, say, a Databricks or something like that. And if you've got existing data factory skills, or event hubs or data lakes, then all of those skills are transferable into the Fabric environment. All of your ingestion patterns are going to be the same. So if you're doing things like a incremental load, and you've got an existing Azure Data Factory pattern that you'd like to use for incremental load, that pattern you'll still be able to use in a Data Factory pipeline, the equivalent workload. And so all of those languages and patterns are transferable. That means you're not starting from scratch, having to learn a whole new language. You're just really adapting your workflow from those from those existing areas that you have.
So, Greg, one common query that most of the users have is, what is the difference between shortcuts and mirroring? So, in my experience, basically shortcuts are like a virtual pointer to the actual source wherein we want to query the data. We are not physically uh, representing or moving that data from that source into our ecosystem. Whereas in mirroring, the data is being physically moved from external source within the Fabric environment, but without any complex designing or architectural flow from our end. Do you like to add anything on that?
No, I think you've got it pretty much spot on, right? Is that with mirroring, it's really around that speed of change data capture out of those existing SQL workloads and things like that, where shortcuts allows us to not have to copy data necessarily. We can leave the data in the place where it lives, and then we're just essentially creating almost metadata over the top of that inside the Fabric environment to present that data as if it lives within one lake, but it's actually lives in another workload, which I think is a great way to prevent those data silos from happening. Okay, so we used to have this old idea in data ingestion when we were talking about data engineering. We would talk about data volume and velocity and veracity, right? The 3 V's of data engineering. And that was around what are the considerations when we're ingesting data into Microsoft Fabric, and then what is the right ingestion method to select to based on what those considerations are, and this idea of the 3 V's is now expanded out because there's actually more these days, So you've got considerations like data volume. So high volume means that you need to choose methods that support a high throughput. Right. So there are workloads in Fabric that are more suited to high throughput, like a copy command in SQL or a data pipeline, compared to the low to medium volume like a Dataflow. Okay, so if you have high volume, then you need to consider your ingestion method for that. You have to consider the data type. So is it structured data? So you could potentially use like the data pipelines, copy, or a data flow to do structured data. They're very good at structured data. But if it's semi-structured or unstructured data, then something like a notebook or lakehouse ingestion method is going to be a better way to go. For your ingestion frequency, you need to consider, is it going to be a batch process or a real-time process, right? So a batch process, that's going to be, you're going to load everything all at once, and then you're going to wait until the next day or the next month, and then you're going to load it all again. So you're potentially going to use those high volume integration methods, ingestion methods, that's data pipelines and the copy again. If you're going to go with more real time, so you need to stream that data in, then you're going to be looking at something like real-time intelligence, event streams, and event houses, which we'll cover later. You also need to consider the developer capability, right? So the skill set of the person who is doing that transformation. And I think this is where Fabric actually really brings a lot to the table, because you can have completely code-free experiences that are almost just as powerful as some of the really full-on coding experiences. And one of the patterns that we use when we're building Fabric for our customers is that we often, where there's people who have existing Power Query skills, we might get them to build some of the ingestion pipelines in their Power Query. So they're using Dataflows to do that, and then we optimize them and upgrade them into notebooks once the business logic has been decided and all that kind of thing. What that means is that your business users have the capability to help the data engineers by going through all that business logic, which is often a sticking point in the data engineering world, is that they're not sure how to apply certain business rules and business logic. Using these types of low code scenarios, you can actually do that. So consider the code skill set required, and then who has the knowledge around what the business rules are that need to be applied in those transformations, and then that will help guide your ingestion method there as well. Then, of course, there's things like integration needs. Do you need to do cross-warehouse integration? So does data need to be moved between warehouses and lakehouses? And what sort of tools do they need to be compatible with? Are you integrating with something else? Are you using a different Microsoft tool? Do you need to access the data via something like SSMS because that's what the business use? You need to think about those tool integration requirements. There's also performance requirements. So does it need to be high performance, and so your data is coming in very quickly. So you have a copy type, transact SQL type thing that would be high performance there, or maybe an event stream for that low latency, high throughput ingestion? Or do you need a moderate performance data pipelines, or maybe a data flow that isn't going to be as fast, but that doesn't really matter. It's only a small amount of data. And so you can kind of do that. And then always there's the complexity of that data transformation, which I kind of covered earlier. I guess, those ingestion methods, there's a lot to think about there, Nandan. Like, what is your kind of experience with that, and what are your thoughts?
So basically, you pretty much covered everything. So base this are the four major transformation aspect on the data ingestion tools that Microsoft Fabric provides. So Dataflow Gen2 are basically low code, no code, wherein even a person with little coding background experience can come and do the transformation based on the UI aspect. But there's a catch on that. Those familiar with Power Query, as you rightfully called out, can even do a backend coding leveraging the Dataflow Gen2. So the Dataflow Gen2 acts as a dual aspect. Even a low code, no code person and a person powerful in Power Query or M query can leverage that. Data pipelines, that which we'll eventually cover, is basically a drag and drop mechanism wherein Microsoft has certain set of activities that have an inbuilt backend coding, ensures that just a simple drag and drop of any activities ensures we are able to move data or do some basic flow across the same. Now those with extreme major transformation aspect and with a heavy coding background can definitely leverage the power of notebooks and the Spark clusters on the same. And of course, Microsoft brings the real-time analytics world into the Fabric, and without us needing to have integrate across multiple other tools like Event Hub, Stream Analytics, or Publisher or a subscriber aspect. So it's based on those considerations. We have to rightfully select the choice for our corresponding initiative. So now let's start with the first aspect, that is the data factory experience. Now, as we saw, the data factory workload or the data factory experience within Microsoft Fabric comprises of two different features, the data pipelines and the Dataflow Gen2. Now, the data pipeline is basically a logical grouping of activities that performs a series of tasks in a controlled manner. Now, what do we mean by activities? Now, activities in a pipeline defines the actions that we need to perform on the data or within the flow. Now, enough theoretical aspect. Let's look some practical. So, within the Microsoft Fabric workspace, let me go and create a data pipeline. DP-700 pipeline. So, within the pipeline, we have different activities. Now, activities, as I said, are actions that you perform on your data or within the flow. Now, there are different types of activities grouped based on specific action that they do. The activities are classified either based on the move and transformation. These set of activities move data from one location to another or clean up that data. There are control flow activities that help in the proper flow across the execution. Then there are some transformation activities that are needed for data transformations within the source and notification activities. Now, those familiar with Azure Synapse pipelines or Azure Data Factory would consider this as a similar aspect, because in the backend, Microsoft is using the same engine but a SaaSified way. So, let's start with couple of aspects. So, there is a lookup activity. Now, we can use a lookup activity to, it's a metadata aspect, to query certain aspects. So, now let me connect. So I need to look up my data to a particular source. Now, to establish to that source, I need a connection created. Now I can create a new connection wherein I'll have to provide which source or sink I want to connect to, and I'll provide the necessary details. Like in case if I want to connect to an Azure SQL database, I need to provide all the server details and the authentication details. But in my case, I already have a connection created to a Dataverse environment, and the connection is equivalent to the Dataverse. Here, I just need to select an entity from my Dataverse environment. Now, by the time that loads, there are other activities as well that I can leverage within my ecosystem. Those activities include a wait activity. In case if I want to wait for some time between my successive iterations, I can wait across. Currently, these two activities are in silos, meaning in case if I execute this pipeline, both of them would get executed parallelly. But in case if I want to define a particular flow between the activities, you can define a flow by connecting them in a sequence. Now, like this is the sequential aspect. I have connected two activities. Now, the data factory supports four different types of dependencies between the activities that can be used to control the execution flow of the connected activities within the same pipelines. It's on skip, on success, on failure, or on completion. So currently it's on success of this activity itself that it would move to the wait activity. In case if I want to have something on failure, meaning in case if I want to send a notification to my teams in case something fails, then I can have on fail aspect, it would move over to the teams aspect. Now, once I create a pipeline, the next step is for me to validate whether the pipeline is correct or not. Meaning, are there any syntactical or is there any aspect that I'm missing out? So for that, we have a validate aspect wherein it would validate whether the pipeline that I've created is proper or not. S- Now let me add another activity. Now when I execute the validate, there were no errors because everything is proper. If I want to run the pipeline, I need to first save the pipeline and then execute. It would get executed. Now currently I'm manually executing the pipeline. But in case if I want to trigger the pipeline based on a particular schedule or based on an event trigger, Microsoft Fabric provides us two different optionalities. One is something called as an event or a blob trigger. That is whenever on some arrival, it would instantly trigger the pipeline, though it is still in preview mode. And then there is another aspect wherein I can explicitly schedule a pipeline on a particular duration, either it be an hourly basis, daily basis, weekly basis, monthly basis. This is how we can schedule the pipeline. Now my pipeline got executed. One can check the details, the lookup activity. I can check what was the input and what was the corresponding output that was provided. So this is the output of the lookup activity. Now one can check all the historical executions under the view run history tab. This would provide me all the previous runs and what were their status corresponding to those corresponding executions. Now, two other major aspects is parameters and variables. Now, the parameters are defined at a pipeline level, and this cannot be modified during a pipeline run. It can only be leveraged while executing the pipeline. And then there is something called as variables. Pipeline variables are the values that can be set and modified during a pipeline run. So pipeline variables can in turn be used to store and manipulate the data during a pipeline run. So the main aspect within the ADF is the copy activity. The data pipeline is the copy activity. One can use the copy activity to move data from one location to another location. So in this case, I'd like to copy the data from a Dataverse into a corresponding lakehouse. So my source would be a Dataverse and my destination would be a lakehouse that I've already created, wherein I want to load it as a file called account.csv. Post that, I can execute this pipeline and it would get executed. So the data pipeline is majorly used since I have created a parameter. I need to provide a parameter at runtime. Though I have not used the parameter anywhere, this is in case if you want to use it, you can pass the parameter at runtime and it would be leveraged throughout the pipeline run with the same value. Now the data pipeline is a tool that we would use to move the data as is from one location to another or to have a controlled flow of executions. Now, in case if you want to do major data transformation, that is where we need a notebook and Dataflow Gen2. So now I'll be showing on the notebook aspect of the Microsoft Fabric. So data pipeline is majorly used, one can consider for data migration initiatives to move data as is. Now for complex transformations, one can use notebooks. So in a notebook, I can mount my lakehouse to a corresponding notebook. So let me mount one of my lake house. In that way, I need not provide the absolute path and I can directly reference any data within that lake house itself. Now a notebook can be parameterized. How to parameterize that? So within this cell, there is an option wherein I can toggle to the parameter cell and I can define a parameter. So let's say input, and I can define the parameter value. Then I can create a new cell. Now notebook provides us different coding languages support from Python, Scala, SQL or R. Now this is the default coding aspect, that is the PySpark. So for now, let me import the time module and print a particular command. So once I execute this, the notebook is connecting to a default PySpark environment and executing that. And here I am leveraging the corresponding parameter. Oh, sorry. This would fail since the parameter that I have defined is inout. Let me stop this session and run again. Now, by the time this is getting executed, I can add another cell layer, and PySpark is the default environment. In case if I have to change it, I can use a magic command called %% and I want to use R script. So this would automatically change the coding aspect. So here I can now execute a particular cell itself. Though this is the default environment, I'm explicitly specifying to leverage the R script. Now there are environments that are present, default environments. In the environments, rather than importing the modules or packages as at runtime, I can have a ready-made environment created with all the necessary libraries installed and leverage it so that we reduce the execution time. Now, by the time this is getting executed, let's move on how to integrate a notebook within the pipeline activity for orchestration. Now, notebook also can be explicitly executed, meaning one can schedule a notebook similar to the pipeline. I can explicitly interactively run it, or I can integrate this within the data pipeline. So within the data pipeline, there is a notebook activity. And in that notebook activity, I can select the notebook of my choice that I want to execute. I can select the parameter that I want to pass it to and the corresponding value. Here I can add the dynamic content and the parameter that I had passed at the runtime. And I can execute it. Now there is one setting called the session tag. Imagine if there are multiple notebooks that are getting executed parallelly, rather than every notebook executing its own, creating its own Spark cluster, a single Spark cluster can be leveraged across. So that's where the high concurrency aspect of Spark cluster can be initiated, wherein under the workspace setting in data engineering and science under Spark setting, under high concurrency, I can enable that pipelines running multiple notebooks would utilize this same Spark application to reduce the Spark time for each session.
In my
So
experience,
this
that's
is how.
really useful. Yeah.
Correct. So this in turn would reduce the execution time and reuse it. So now moving over to the Dataflow Gen2 aspect. Over to Greg.
Thank you, Nandan. Now I love all of that high code stuff and love a bit of Python, but what I really love is low code Power Query, mate. This is my area, and I this is my preferred way to do data transformation. I think the Power Query UI is the best data transformations experience in the business. And so coming from Power BI, this is how I want to do it. And the thing about Dataflow Gen2 is that it gives us this low-code graphical environment for creating these ETL solutions now in the cloud. We don't just have to do it in our Power BI desktop. So we can extract data from multiple sources, transform it, and load it into the destination, which is an important piece. You can use Power Query to transform and load that data. You can run those data flows independently as a one-off, like you do in sort of the Power BI world, or you can integrate them into that pipeline that Nandan was just showing. And I'll quickly show you what the Power Query experience looks like. So here we've got a task flow, which is this is the design experience here in Fabric, and I've got this consolidated budget table, and I need to bring in data from multiple different tables and consolidate it together. Now I'm a business user. I want to be able to do this. There's a few business rules I need to fix this up before I hand it over to the data engineer. So I'm going to create a data flow to do that for me. So under here, I can create a new item. I scroll down to, and I look for this Dataflow Gen2 experience here. So we created Dataflow Gen2. And one of the recent features of Dataflow Gen2 now is that it supports Git integration. So now we can enable this, and that means that that our data flows are also going to be backed up into our Git repository. This is a massive piece. So so we want to enable Git integration. Let's create our data flow. We'll just call this DP-700. So this opens up the Power Query experience, and this is a very kind of familiar experience for people from the Power BI world. I'm going to choose to get some data from one lake, and I'm going to find my Aardvark Finance. I work for this Aardvark company. We're going to look for the Bronze Lake House, which hopefully is here somewhere. Aardvark Finance Bronze, here it is. They called themselves Aardvark so that they'd be at the top of the telephone directory. So hopefully the demo gods are with me, and that'll load in a reasonable amount of time. Okay, so and then it's got this series of SAP tables here, some general ledger tables. I need to bring all these tables in into my Power Query experience. So I'm going to do this just like I would in Power BI. It gives me some nice stats down here about what's happening in the lakehouse, which I like. So I'm just going to select those 5 tables, the different countries. I'm going to hit create. And so for those of you familiar with Power Query now, this is that point and click Power Query experience where we can create a table based on these 5 tables. So I'm going to quickly do an append here. We're going to append queries as new. What this is going to do is essentially a union. I'm going to union all the tables together. And see, I don't have to write any code here. Whoops, I've accidentally added USA twice. All I do is just follow the bouncing ball. I can disable these tables here now from staging. I don't need them to be available in the lakehouse. We're not going to present these tables. And so my new append table then, we can call this maybe SAP GL all. Oh, we've got a typo. And I can then, I've appended all of my tables together. I haven't had to write any code. If you're familiar with Power Query, you can of course use the advanced editor and get into that code level thing, but this is really around creating that. And if I have a look at the view, the diagram view here, I can see a diagram of exactly kind of what's happening. Just zoom out a little bit so we can see that. A diagram of all of the tables coming into that single table as a kind of idea of the lineage of that. And so that's kind of the Power Query low-code experience, right? And this is a really powerful thing. What I can do here is I can publish in my query settings at the bottom here. I can set the data destination. And here, this is where I load that into another area of my lakehouse. So I'm loading that to my silver lakehouse or to my gold lakehouse. And so we've got that going for us. And so Power Query really gives us that powerful low code experience, but we still get all of the transformations, all of the amazing stuff that you can kind of do in Power Query, and that's available to us in Dataflow Gen2. So love Dataflow Gen2. So now going from kind of 0 to a million, we're going to start now look at real-time analytics as well, right? So this is the opposite end of the spectrum. This is where we've got a scenario where you need to, I'll just quickly show this. This is a scenario where you've got real-time streaming data. This is probably the most complex area of analytics that you can come across. This is where you've got event streams that are streaming data in. You need to be able to deal with this data in a temporal window, and you need to be able to do a bunch of stuff to that data as it comes through and into your lakehouse and into your Fabric environment. So Fabric has a bunch of capability in this space. They brought all of that stuff out of event hubs, and stream analytics is now come into Fabric real-time intelligence. We've got event streams, event houses. We've got KQL, which is really similar to the idea of SQL being a database that is optimized for sort of transactional and analytical workloads. KQL is optimized for these real-time workloads. So it's optimized to deal with this data as it's coming in, as it's going through, and we can use KQL, this query language, to analyze that data as if it's in a database like we would with SQL, and we'll have a quick look at that. You can create real-time dashboards using from real-time analytics, and you can use Data Activator to automate actions, so trigger actions when this number gets too high. We want to know because that means that the temperature is too high in the fridge and all of our meat's going to spoil in our thing. So we've got these scenarios where we have these real-time pieces. So let's have a quick look at a real-time analytics demo. I had some bad weather recently, so I downloaded the weather sample here from into my workspace, and let's have a quick look. I work for Aardvark Health now. This is the Aardvark Health workspace I've got going here. Got a whole bunch of healthcare stuff, and then they wanted to look at the weather. So you see we've got this event house down the bottom here. This event house is a place that's going to store all of those event streams, all of those data coming in from all the different locations. In this case, it's going to be weather data coming in from a source. We've got a KQL database, which is storing our weather data, the weather sample data, and then what's called a KQL query set, which is essentially like a bunch of scripts that we can run against that database, similar to SQL or Python. You can run that against your KQL database. So if we have a quick look at the event house, you can see that we can do monitoring over our event house. This is where you can see all the different things that's kind of happening in terms of the system. You've got your KQL database over here on the left. We can see that. You can see that we can see the different events that are coming in, how much storage is being used. If we look at the database itself, this is where this is showing the data as it's being ingested into the event house. And then finally, we can run a KQL query set here. And in this KQL query set, we can actually run these various pieces, just like you would SQL. You would run a KQL query set against against your weather table. And so if we have a look at this sample, I think it'll be, we can do quite complex KQL. So KQL is it's a fairly, I find it quite intuitive language, but it is quite different to something like SQL. There are aspects to it that make it different. And the reason why it has to be a different language is because of that real-time aspect of the data. We need a different language to do that, but you can do quite powerful stuff with it. So you can do like visualizations, showing, so this is all the weather along the US coastline here, as well as kind of a fairly simple, the standard stuff that you might do where you're just doing basic analysis against your query set. So this is a visualization of how many weather events happened in which state, for example. So you've got a visualization aspect to it, which you can use then to create those real-time dashboards, or you can just do fairly simple kind of transformations against that queries against that, like you would an SQL database. So you've got quite a lot of capability here in the real-time space, and this is obviously an area that when you're doing the DP-700, you will want to be familiar with these sample query sets. Run through them, make sure that you understand the language here. Like I said, it's an interesting kind of language. Once you sort of get your head around the way that it's structured, it is fairly straightforward to learn. And you can see these query sets do give you instructions on what each of the pieces mean. And there's a ton of samples in the Fabric area. So you can go through and you can really learn how to transact on real-time data in a way that is that's fairly easy to get us started with, and then you won't be too intimidated. You need to do these samples because real-time data isn't the sort of thing that people do every day, and so they've got lots and lots of samples. I think there's probably like 8 or 9 of these different types of samples that you can do to really learn the KQL area and do that and learn how to create dashboards and do all the real-time stuff. So real-time is really cool. That is high code. I love Power Query. That's low code. But we'll get back to the presentation because we do need to start wrapping it up. So we've covered a bunch of stuff now in terms of the DP-700 Nandan. What we really want to do now is talk a little bit about some practical tips for how do people, I guess, bridge the gap between their existing skills and the Fabric specific capabilities that they'll need for the DP-700 exams. So I guess the first one from you go. Why don't you give your opinion, Nandan? Yeah.
Correct. So Microsoft does provide a free Fabric trial capacity, and there is a Microsoft Learn path for DP-700 exam itself. So the first aspect that I'll request everyone is have your own personal Fabric trial version and get some hands-on practice following the experimentation that have been suggested in the Microsoft Learn path. That itself should cover all the basic aspects for us to proceed and for them to understand as the first step, I'll say.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's a hands-on practice is just so important, and being able to leverage the learn stuff and being able to do that is going to be so important. I think in terms of languages, I think T-SQL is going to be really important. You need to, if you're coming from that Python background, from a data engineering perspective, you want to know a bit of Python and a bit of T-SQL. If you're coming from a Power BI background and you're like me, you won't have to worry about the Power Query questions. You'll be able to answer them. You'll need to brush up on your Python and your T-SQL and a little bit of KQL. I think you need to have practical kind of knowledge of KQL, but I don't think you need to be super deep on that space. It will help you though. So there's quite a few languages there, but this is data engineering. We're not talking about kind of stuff that's all low code. So you will need to know those languages.
So Greg, in my experience, there is Copilot enabled in every particular component within Fabric. So that in turn would help the users use their natural language to in turn generate the code and understand that aspect.
Yeah, that's a good point. That the whole idea of having Copilot is really good to help you with those languages. So you don't need to know syntax as much as you need to know patterns, I think is probably the key thing. Okay. So next up, we've got the implementing real-time intelligence. So that will be the next piece that we're going to cover. So make sure you come along to that one. That's going to be the next one. And real-time intelligence is going to go into a bit more detail of the stuff that I kind of covered and a little bit of that KQL stuff. And I think there's some data warehousing coming up. There's lots of cool stuff. Don't forget to register for FabCon. That is an important thing to do. I think FabCon is, I actually can't make it. I'm based in Australia. It's a bit far for me to go to Las Vegas. Are you able to make it, Nandan? I'm so jealous. I really want to go.
No, unfortunately, I have some other commitments during that time, so I'm unable to go. But I do have
All
my
right.
colleagues going with whom I'll get their feedback.
Of course, yeah, you've got lots of people over there doing that, don't you? So yeah, that's yeah, I'm jealous. I don't have anyone. I'll have to ask all the Australians to represent for me. Okay, and of course, don't forget the 50% discount for the DP-700. That is right there. So there's that link again. We definitely want to do that. I think we've got like maybe a few minutes left for some kind of questions and that kind of stuff. So if you've got questions, I'm happy to try and answer a couple of questions in the chat if there's time to do so. Otherwise, you've got resources. There's the 2 links for the resources. You've got the preparation resources there. So akka.ms, I am ready. So when you're ready to go, that's the link to follow. If you've got continuing questions after this, if the moderators haven't quite got to your question in the chat, or you want to continue the conversation, there's a second link there, the forum/DP700. That's so that you can continue after this session. You can still link up with the experts, and they will answer the questions that are posted there over time. So if you've got some more burning questions that you haven't been able to answer during this session, then I'm more than happy to then they're more than happy to answer them on that piece.
So, Greg, the first question that I say is, what is the
Mm-hmm.
difference between Dataflow Gen 1 and Gen 2? Can we provide different scenarios when to use Gen 1 and Gen 2? So, in my aspect, Dataflow Gen 2 is an advanced version or a better version than Dataflow Gen 1, an upgraded version. And Dataflow Gen 2's the major difference between those two is Dataflow Gen 2 acts as a data movement tool wherein you can reuse it as a Dataflow Gen 1, wherein you just use it for Power BI reporting aspect and do your common transformation within the data flow, or you can use it for data movement, do major complex transformations from your source and add it to some of the fixed set of destinations that are supported, be it lakehouse, fabric, warehouse, etc. So having a destination to move your transform data is one
Mm.
major difference between Dataflow Gen 2 that is not present in Dataflow Gen 1. Would you like to add on something else?
Yeah, I think the only other thing with Dataflow Gen 2 is that integration with Git. And so Dataflow Gen 2, now it's a bit of a weird thing where Dataflow Gen 2, if you created them before Git integration, then you need to recreate them to get that Git integration to work. They did re-architect some stuff in the back end, but a Gen 1 is not going to, never going to, I don't think it's ever going to be compatible with your source code, your source control, right? So if you do want to use source control, then obviously a Dataflow Gen 2. But that destination piece that Gen 2 provides, that's a massive piece from my perspective as a Power Query user for sure. We've got a question here, which is how to set up a Fabric trial without a work email. That's an interesting question.
So basically, you can have your own personal Microsoft account, which you can convert, correct? And when you log into my.visualstudio.com, you get a benefit wherein you can have your own M365 trials developer subscription. And similarly, you can activate your own Azure subscription as well, a free trial that Microsoft provides. So post M365 developer aspect, you would have your own personal tenant, and in your own personal tenant, you can create an account and associate a fabric. Since it's your own tenant, Microsoft provides a fixed set of aspects to allocate free trial licenses within that tenant. You can create an account and enable a fabric free trial on that account. Or the other way would be, since you have a free Azure developer Azure subscription, you can create your own fabric capacity and associate that for your workspace if you do
Yeah,
not have a
awesome.
free trial version.
Yeah, some great tips. Okay, well, I think we're going to wrap it up, Nandan. Where's the best place to find you? Is it on LinkedIn?
It's on LinkedIn and Twitter.
On LinkedIn and Twitter. So look out for
Yes.
Nandan. His name's right there. You can find me on LinkedIn. Just look for Power BI Unicorn. I'm right there. I'm easy to find. Thank you so much for today, Nandan. It was really awesome. Appreciate your knowledge.
Thank you to you and the moderators as well. and the
And thanks to the
producers.
moderators in the chat. Yeah, thanks for answering all those questions. Well, that's it for today, folks. We're going to wrap it up. So we'll
Thank
see
you.
you next time and see you later. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.